Yep, it says
There
it
we
is.
go. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about uh, things that people take with MDMA, poly drug use, the pros and cons, and go through a lot of different medicines. But I'm also going to want you to share your experiences with this because our shared experience is better than just me blabbing. And also talk a little bit about difficult clients. I recently had a rather difficult client, and how to work with people who might be really stuck in a certain way. I'll go over some of the main ways people get stuck. Um, Matter of fact, let me start there. Um, One thing that can happen, and I actually found myself feeling a little bit annoyed with a client, which is pretty rare or very rare, because we kept on going over one thing over and over again, and they couldn't really get past it. And something that you can do in situations like that is to name and label what you see going on. And one of those labels could be, I see us looping about this issue over and over again, and I'd like to move on and tell them in the recording, you'll see that there's a tendency to keep on going back to this belief or this issue or this tendency. And one of the more frustrating tendencies is what I have labeled mismatching or contrarian. And with this particular client, anything I said, they would either disagree with or find an exception. And of course, when I said that they do that, they disagreed with it and found an exception. And when I said that you just did that, they disagreed with it and found an exception. So we did that. And on the MDMA, they really weren't seeing this or getting that. But I think on the recording, they will. That literally for 5 hours, I think pretty much everything I said, they disagreed with or found some exception, which made it very hard to move forward. And this person hasn't had any long-term relationship ever, even though they're, in their 40s. And I think that's why, who wants to connect with somebody like that? Um, so naming the pattern that you see, which will probably then show up in the next 10 seconds or the next minute, is something. But other patterns I've seen besides the mismatcher or contrarian is people who have the pattern of always getting down on themselves. I can't do anything right. I fucked up again. I did this. I did that. There's that pattern as well, which sometimes if you point out to them that they have this pattern, they'll go, "Oh yeah, I can't do it." Like that, it feeds into their pattern. So what do you do then? First of all, I'd be interested in your opinion about that. What I've done is I've found that the three good things exercise is really helpful. It's like the antidote. And just to remind you, that's basically their answer to two questions. Has anything good happened to you that you enjoyed, valued, or appreciated in the last day? Have you found anything that you enjoyed, valued, or appreciated? And the second question, what character trait in you or skill or ability helped to make that thing happen? So what character trait, and wording it precisely, I think, is helpful. Dr. Seligman, who came up with the method, words it differently. I don't think people react as well to his wording. So what character trait, skill, or ability help to make that thing happen. And I find that people always answer that really poorly. If you ask them what's wrong with you, they might go on a rampage for an hour. But if you ask them what is a character trait, skill, or ability that's good in you, they usually will say two words, like, and they're general words, like, "Well, I'm nice," or something like that. So what almost always happens with that particular method is then I answer it for them. And my answer is like two paragraphs with incredible amount of detail. Probably half the time I do that. Uh, let me
Yeah,
let me
thank
mute
you.
people here that need to be muted. Um, Probably half the time that I do that, the people end up in tears because they're not used to hearing good things about themselves. And I say, well, yeah, you see, there's a difference between saying you're nice and then, saying it in a lot of detail. I mean, just the fact that they are paying good money for a session means that they're open to learning, that they have the finances, that they have the sincerity. You can go on and on, that they're exploring, willing to explore new things. So if you are in the position of answering for them that question, try to make it as detailed and flowery as possible. And that's when people tend to have this pattern of being down on themselves. Another thing I do with people who have that pattern is I tell them to appreciate how good they are at seeing their shortcomings. Like, if there's an Olympics for the ability to see one's shortcomings, you might win the gold. Like you're fantastic at it. And just the idea of changing it to appreciating how good they are at something, even if it's finding their own faults, uh, changes the energy. Because the energy of being down on yourself is like, I'm no good, I do it wrong, I'm guilty, blah, 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 to like the humor of you're like a gold medal winner at this. You can see things that other people can't see. You're fantastic at it. Appreciate how well you do this. Um, so those are two things. Another thing that can come up is denial. Doesn't happen a lot on MDMA, although it did happen with this client I was working with recently, where they just couldn't see certain things about themselves. And sometimes that happens because, the MDMA makes them a little more fuzzy headed. Doesn't happen to many people, but some people don't see certain things as clearly as they might normally see it. But they might see it in the recording. Um, so with denial, or dismissing or lessening, once again, I call it out. I say, well, I think that you're dismissing seeing this as clearly as you could be seeing it, at which case they dismiss that as well. And I say, yeah, that's another example that you just dismissed what I said. This dismissing of other people's reality is a major stumbling block in relationships. And it's pretty much the default. So it's not an unusual thing. I work with a lot of couples, and uh, I call it dismissing someone else's reality because it when somebody says, you're being a jerk and doing it like this, they may be wrong in their assessment, but you should never dismiss somebody's reality, even if it's wrong. You should say, so it sounds like you feel like I'm being a jerk, I'm not listening to you. That must be very frustrating. Until somebody feels like you got their reality, even if it's wrong, they don't listen to anything else you say. So it's very important to always validate somebody's experience. And men are particularly bad at this in general, um, with women. Uh, Now, I'm going to say a couple of generalizations here, which might first seem inaccurate and second sexist. But having worked with hundreds of couples, I see the consistency of which I see certain patterns is really close to 100%. So what I see in general is that women make their feelings be the most real thing to them. And because God has a sense of humor, men almost very frequently explain why their feelings are wrong or misguided or don't really listen to them. And that creates a lot of trouble in relationships, obviously. So if you read my book, Communication Miracles for Couples, you know that I talk a lot about not dismissing people's feelings and using the term, it sounds like blank in one sentence or less, and that must feel blank. That's a way to validate their reality without having to necessarily agree with that. You're basically saying, I agree that you're having the experience you are having. And then people open up in terms of being able to hear. So yesterday, when I was working with this client, they clearly weren't hearing me. And when that happened, I would say, it sounds like blank. I'd repeat what he said, and that must feel blank. Now, being that he had this contrarian mismatcher tendency, he would always disagree with what I said, even though I used his exact words. And then I would say, so it sounds like I didn't quite get it right, and that must feel blank. And we would do this pattern a bunch. And then I would point out that anything I say, you will say that there's an exception in mismatch, of which he, of course, then said there was an exception is mismatched again. Now, my hope is that when he listens to the recording, he will see this pattern over and over and over. And as I mentioned before, the recordings can be as impactful and sometimes much more impactful than the actual session. So that's a little bit about that. Now, another thing that I found useful when you create a stuck place is saying the words, I'm feeling blank and I'm wanting blank. So yesterday when working with this client, I would say, I'm feeling like we're not connecting. I'm wanting to, for us to both be able to feel like we're hearing each other. And that's a powerful thing to do in any relationship. I'm feeling blank, I'm wanting blank. A lot of times people say what they don't want, and saying what you don't want is not useful. And that's kind of the default in a lot of relationships as well. I don't want to have this argument anymore. Well, that tends to make people defensive and it doesn't tell them what you want. So being able to say, I want to feel like we're both listening to each other, that gives you the target. And people need to be reminded of the target frequently. So that's a little bit about dealing with challenging clients. And we'll have time for Q&A in a little bit. But I do want to go over some of the poly drug use ideas. And we'll have shared experience and Q&A. In case you don't know terms, it's good to know terms. Candy flipping is when people take MDMA and LSD together. It was quite popular. I think the popularity of poly drug use has gone down in recent years. But in the 80s and 90s, candy flipping was quite popular. I've done it twice and found it to be amazing. The only difficulty is MDMA lasts about 5 hours, LSD lasts about 10 hours. So there's not quite that sync in time. But the LSD can be kind of, it's never been challenging for me, but it is challenging for other people. And there's been some studies that show that taking LSD with MDMA or psilocybin with MDMA actually reduces the chance of a bad experience with psilocybin or LSD. People don't really have, I mean, I guess some people have had bad experiences with MDMA. I've never seen it, other than maybe vomiting or something like that. But I'd say, 20% of people who take psilocybin or LSD experience fear or quote bad trip. And there are studies that show that taking MDMA with those drugs greatly reduces the chances of people having bad experiences or feeling a lot of fear. 'Cause it just kind of opens the heart, makes everything okay, etc. Hippie flipping is psilocybin and MDMA. We'll talk more about that, and I'll be interested in knowing if uh, people have had much experience with that. I've only done that twice, and once again, it was fantastic. And I have had a couple clients do that as well. I generally don't feel, I generally don't think poly drug use is a good thing. Uh, and I usually don't recommend it. Although for clients that have been um, stuck with just MDMA or psilocybin, I think it can be helpful. And when you do psilocybin with MDMA, there's various things as to when to take each one and such, and how much of a dose there is. That's another big indication or thing to work out. Some people think, well, taking half a gram with MDMA softens the MDMA, makes people more emotionally available. Once you start working with, say, more than a gram of psilocybin mushrooms with MDMA, it's, in my opinion, a little bit less therapeutic because the psilocybin makes it, harder for people to track what you're saying and such. But once again, there's individual differences. I once worked with a client that took 2 grams of psilocybin. They weren't very sensitive, and MDMA, they were sharp as a tack. So one of the things that makes this whole area of poly drug use difficult is it opens up so many different variables. How do people react to psilocybin? How do they react to MDMA? How do they react to both? What dosage should you have? When should you have each? That can get complicated. But I do think that people exploring half a gram up to a gram of psilocybin with MDMA is something that many people find enhances the trip, enhances their spiritual connection, and can definitely be valuable for some people. Now, the best way to know any of this is for you to try it and see what it does for you. But that's only one person's experience. That's why we're going to have a little bit of a shared experience of people here that hopefully have had some of these alternatives. Kitty flipping is MDMA with ketamine. Generally, the ketamine's done towards the fourth hour. I have only a couple experiences with this. I didn't find it that interesting. Ketamine is an anesthetic, so it tends to numb you out a little bit, which is great if you have anxiety. But on MDMA, your anxiety is mostly gone, so it's kind of just leads to a little bit of a numbing. But a lot of people found it helpful for coming down from MDMA, which some people find that to come down a little bit difficult because here you're in this open space, and then you start having your normal stupid thoughts again, and you go, this is hard. But the ketamine can be useful there for making it more gentle. Same with marijuana. A lot of people do it around hour 4. What I find with marijuana is it tends to increase the MDMA again. So it's almost like taking an MDMA booster. And people are different. That's what a lot of people found. Other people find that just makes it come down more gentle. But when I've taken a hit of MDMA or an edible, a hit of marijuana or an edible around hour 4, it just adds 2 more hours to the MDMA. So that's something to consider. And once again, your experience and the experience of other people is helpful to know how these things affect people. We want to talk quickly about alcohol. I don't suggest that people drink while on MDMA for various reasons, but one reason is that um, it can disrupt body temperature. It can be a little bit dangerous. People who were taking MDMA in clubs and drinking didn't realize that they might be overheating. So it kind of reduces your awareness of what's going on in your body and what you need. Also, alcohol makes you dehydrated, and MDMA can make you dehydrated. So if you put those two together plus dancing, that can be a dangerous combination. And there's no really good reason, from what I've heard, of drinking alcohol with MDMA. So I think that's a bad idea. There's the topic of nootropics. If you don't know what nootropics are, they're things that help sharpen your brain. Once again, I don't think that they're really needed for MDMA unless somebody's really insensitive. One nootropic that we all know is caffeine, but there's a lot of nootropics out there. You can go to neurohacker.com. They have all these different products. You can type nootropics, nootropics, into Amazon. You'll see dozens of these things. A lot of them will have some caffeine, some ginkgo, some ashwagandha, some ginseng. Some of them have these things called racetams. These are all like brain food. I take nootropics about once a week because I like how they sharpen them. Some of them can actually mimic some of the things of MDMA. One that I like that I'd recommend is something called Qualia, Qualia. And they if you don't take them very often, they really can be a boost. I don't think they're really necessary with MDMA though. Um, Something you may not know, there's various one of the reasons why MDMA didn't get FDA approval is that, I don't know if you noticed, but the FDA is largely funded by big pharma. Um, that's how it actually is funded to a large extent. And big pharma didn't want MDMA to be approved because they would lose billions of dollars in antidepressants and other things. But big pharma is putting a fair amount of money into trying to find their own patented versions of MDMA. And there's several that are really good, have shown incredible promise, meaning not only do they do what MDMA does, but they have less side effects. And they are in some ones in stage 3 clinical trials. I wanted to see if I could buy it. You can buy it. It costs $9,000 per dose currently. Costs them 11 cents to make, but they're trying to not put this out there yet. And when and if they ever get FDA approval, I'll let you know. But that is going to be a future. So I think the future of doing therapy while people are on drugs is very, very positive. It may be MDMA, it may be one of these analogs that big pharma patents. You can't patent MDMA because it was invented in 1912. But they're putting a fair amount of money into these things, and they probably will come up with something that works really well in the next 3 to 5 years. MDMA and GHB, often called the date rape drug, that's called twilight flipping. I don't recommend it because it's hard to get the right dose of GHB. The range for it being dangerous is not that high, or so I wouldn't recommend it. But people do use this because the combination of MDMA and GHB can be very good for sex. MDMA and cocaine is called poppy flipping. Once again, you don't really, it's not popular, but it's good to know the terms. And let's see if there's anything else I want to say. Oh, MDMA and of course 5-MeO DMT. That lecture we did last time has gotten several hundred hits. Uh, and what Marcus was saying is that some people will do this around hour 4 or 5 of MDMA. And you can listen to that lecture to get more of that information. Uh, let's see if there's anytime you do 5-MeO DMT, make sure that there's a sitter there who knows what they're doing, because you want to get the right dose. You want to, and it's an intense drug. So it's not something to just do recreationally on your own unless you have a lot of experience. But even then, I wouldn't suggest it. So that's a little bit about all the different things. I'm going to stop the recording or pause the recording so that we can do Q&A and people can share their experiences more openly.